Professor Marandi, Ansarallah in Yemen carry out several military operations. This includes the targeting of U.S. aircraft. There's a bombing campaign happening. The aircraft carrier USS Truman was targeted with ballistic missiles. It was forced out of the northern Red Sea over 1,000 kilometers away. And this was achieved using drones and, as I said, cruise missiles. The Yemeni armed forces, Ansarallah, has also carried out several strikes in Jaffa as well as in Tel Aviv. Talk about what the significance of all of this is. You know, this past month has seen a lot of people look at the situation negatively, and Israel boast about its dominant position. But Ansarallah has repeatedly broken the Iron Dome and has stood up to the United States and the UK in a big way. What is the significance of all of this?
Those who believe that the Israeli regime has won, they are badly mistaken. I don't see things that way at all. As you rightly point out, Ansarullah is a very effective fighting force. The armed forces of Yemen are making the fight against the resistance much more costly by driving the U.S. Navy away and the U.S. aircraft carrier away from the shores of Yemen. It makes it much more costly for the Americans to carry out flights, whether it's airstrikes or reconnaissance. The Israeli strikes are very costly for the Israeli regime, and they get extensive support from the United States, just like they did when they attacked Iran. It's the United States really that enables these attacks, but these strikes are very costly for the regime. And we have to remember the Saudis were carrying out years of airstrikes, day and night, against Yemen, and so were the Emiratis with their billions of dollars of money, and they lost the war. They had to accept a ceasefire. The Israeli regime, even though the Americans give them what they need, they don't have those hundreds of billions of dollars that the Saudis did and wasted, and that the Emirates wasted. So this is every airstrike against Yemen is going to be very costly. The Israeli regime can't do anything that the Americans haven't done already, and Yemen, by firing these very inexpensive drones and inexpensive missiles, because they're produced by Yemen, they're not produced by some expensive Western company. They spend a little, and their enemies spend a lot. So each missile that strikes Tel Aviv or any other city in Palestine, that creates a lack of confidence for foreigners, for investors, for Israelis who are thinking of leaving and more should think seriously about leaving. So Yemen is in a very strong position. And even though the Americans have been bombing it, and we saw a joint operation by the Americans and the Israelis and their sidekick, the British, it's not having an impact. So obviously, this is just going to cost them more. Every time they carry out these strikes and reconnaissance missions, it costs them a lot of money, and the Yemenis are still successful in carrying out their operations. And of course, Yemen is a country which has defeated many invaders in the past. And so it's literally impossible for the Americans to do much more than what they've already done. One thing that you did mention in your introduction that I want to discuss briefly, and that is something that I've stopped speaking about because some people respond negatively. But you said that Iran's carrying out these military maneuvers to warn the Israelis that Iran's ready for war. That is absolutely correct. They're not just warning the Israelis; they're warning the Americans. And Iran's capabilities have been, I think, used across the country to prepare it for any eventual conflict. However, the Iranian response to Israel for its strike on Iran regardless of the fact that its impact on Iran was very limited. But Iran is going to strike back at Israel. Don't think that no one should imagine that Iran has decided not to respond to the Israeli regime strike. It will be a very painful strike, and it will happen. I remember last time round, a lot of people began criticizing me. Of course, I'm not a decision maker, and people can just criticize me and attack me all they want. But I think the last person to say this was what's his name, Piers Morgan, and then literally hours later, the Iranians attacked. The Iranians will strike the Israeli regime, and it will be a very significant strike. So the resistance is alive and well. We see that Hamas and Islamic Jihad continue to strike the Israeli regime. The regime continues to give casualties, and they've had a number of casualties in the last few hours. Hezbollah is preparing for the next phase, and if the Israeli regime does not leave southern Lebanon, then they will pay the price. But also, the Israeli regime is in a difficult situation in Syria because they've occupied 40% of the country's water reserves. They've occupied an enormous amount of territory, including key heights. But they have to protect them. They have to control them. They are overstretched. So now they have, and they cannot retreat because these fanatics in Tel Aviv and elsewhere think that this is going to be their territory. So they are overstretched. If there's going to be conflict with Hezbollah, they are vulnerable. Of course, Turkey and Al Qaeda, they're not going to do anything against the Israeli regime, as we know. This whole overthrow of the Syrian government was a joint operation carried out between Erdogan, Netanyahu, and Biden. And I think over the past few weeks, those who've been critical have been vindicated. We've seen ethnic cleansing happen in Syria. We've seen public executions. We've been seeing people disappear and their bodies being found. We've seen public torture. And these people are so brutal and so barbaric that they do it in front of cameras. It's fine for them. But if you've noticed, and I'm sure you have, and so have your viewers, that we don't see any of this on Western media. In fact, I saw a clip, I think, of a BBC journalist or BBC reporter. She was on Democracy Now! Or something, and she was basically justifying the ethnic cleansing and the killing of the Alawites. She was saying that they were guilty. That's how I wasn't listening carefully, but she seemed to be justifying what Al Qaeda was doing. So I think what's happening in Syria is a vindication of Iran's position, that Iran was always saying that we're no fans of the Ba'athist Party and the Ba'athist Party rule in Syria, just as we weren't fans of Iraq, but they were infinitely preferable to Al Qaeda and ISIS, these monsters that Erdogan and NATO and Obama and oil and gas-rich countries in the Persian Gulf created. Both in Afghanistan in the 1980s and then later on in Syria and elsewhere. So, but in any case, the Israelis are overstretched. They are in they have to keep troops in parts of Syria, and that's going to make it more difficult for them if the ceasefire collapses in Lebanon. And also, they have to be prepared for a collapse of the ceasefire with Hezbollah, and they have to have troops in the West Bank and, as I said, in Syria. So we're going to see a significant Iranian strike. Yemen is causing a lot of trouble. Hezbollah is keeping Israeli troops, significant portion of them, in the north. And also Israel, by taking so much Syrian territory, they are humiliating Al Qaeda. They're humiliating Jolani. I prefer to continue calling him Jolani. and as I prefer saying HTS, calling HTS Al Qaeda because that's who they are. And it's also humiliating Erdogan, who always pretended that he was a supporter of the Palestinian people. He has done nothing but support sectarian death squads. He's allowed the Israelis to take so much of Syria, and he continues to give transport cheap oil from Baku, among other things, to Netanyahu. So I don't see things nearly as negatively as some of your viewers do, or some friends of mine, both inside and outside Iran. And I should also point one other thing, and I know it's not linked to your question, but Syria has, despite the misery that people are facing in Syria, and things are not good at all. There are all sorts of shortages. There's a lot of, and the violence and the assassinations and the murders, all that aside, there's a lot of trouble inside Syria, and the burden has been lifted off of Iran's shoulders. Iran has been spending perhaps up to five, if not more than $5 billion a year to help the Syrian economy. The Russians were paying as well, and so were the Iraqis. That burden has been lifted, and it is for Mr. Erdogan to start coughing up money to support ISIS and Al Qaeda.
This view, Professor Marandi, that you hold, Ansarallah also holds a very defiant stance right now. During the bombing campaign, we had a 1 million person march happening in the capital of Yemen, in Sana'a, and what they were chanting was, "We are in solidarity with Gaza. We will not let your airstrikes deter us." This is really interesting too, because what Ansarallah has demonstrated in conjunction as a new additional member of the Axis of Resistance is that it has not just the ability to resist the bombing campaigns and the attempts to destroy them, but it also has the ability to send a missile, which not even the United States owns, a hypersonic missile, in just 11 minutes into Israel, that which is over 2,000 kilometers away. I mean, this is actually huge stuff that not many people are covering. Your thoughts, Professor Marandi?
Well, the people of Yemen are very sophisticated people. As we all know, Iran helps Yemen. Iran helps Gaza. The fact that Hamas and its allies continue to fight, the fact that they are successful is because Iran continues to support them. Iran has its ways of supporting Gaza. It's been doing it for many years. That's how the tunnels were built. That's how the weapon systems were created. And they will continue to do so. And they're doing so as we speak. No one else, it's no one but Iran. And the same is true with Yemen. But you have to have young, sophisticated people in Gaza. You have to have young, sophisticated people in Yemen. You have to have young, sophisticated people in Lebanon to be able to carry out these projects. So in the West, they like to ridicule Yemen or the people of Yemen, but they are very sophisticated, very competent, and they are causing a lot of trouble. But what is really despicable and sickening is that the Americans and the British and the Israeli regime, they bombed Sana'a, the capital, while people were protesting against the genocide, against the Holocaust. They bombed the city very close to where people were protesting. That is an ugly act of terrorism being carried out by the regime in Washington and the regime in London. Truly despicable. I can only think of once when in Iran people were protesting and Saddam Hussein tried to bomb the Friday prayers, and which caused actually people to come in much larger numbers the week after. And but the point is that this is truly despicable. I mean, we expect all this sort of thing from the Israeli regime. It is a supremacist regime. It considers non-Zionists to be non-Jewish Zionists to be Amalek and subhuman. And so for them to bomb people as they're protesting on the streets is normal. They're slaughtering the people of Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza every day. They slaughter Lebanese families who support the resistance. They've been doing it all the time. They'd be bombing Syria under the Assad government regularly, and they never cared about civilians or innocent people. But for the Americans to get involved, and for the British to get involved, and to bomb these cities as people are protesting against genocide, I think is a new low for these two regimes.
But will it work, Professor Marandi? Because some may look at what Ansarallah does and the state of the axis of resistance and believe that even these strikes, I mean, you have millions of Israelis, you have running to bomb shelters at any given time just because Ansarallah is firing their ballistic missiles and their hypersonic missiles into Israel. And we saw the panic at the Ben Gurion airport, the successful strike on the power plant, the Ribat power plant. But some may say, well, is this enough to really change the calculus? I see that Israel and the United States and the UK are actually obsessing quite a lot about how they are going to stop Ansarallah. And some I've seen in mainstream publications have said that it might be worth Israel actually conceding something to the Palestinians in order to stop what Ansarallah is doing, because they don't believe, some of these think tankers don't believe that this will stop anytime soon, and it could get a lot worse. Your thoughts?
Well, that was the objective from day one. Ansarullah, the Yemeni armed forces, the Yemeni government, were saying that we are implementing the Genocide Convention. We are blockading the Israeli regime in order to stop the genocide. And instead of blocking the genocide, or instead of ending the genocide, the Americans, because they could have blocked it a year ago, they could have blocked it 13, 14, 15 months ago. All they had to do was tell the Israelis, we won't give you the weapons to slaughter these women and children. But they enabled it. And so did the Europeans and the Germans and everyone else. But Ansarullah was saying that we're going to continue this blockade until the genocide stops. So basically, what these think tankers are saying is what was the objective of Ansarullah from the very beginning. That was the objective of Hezbollah. Even now, the 60-day ceasefire in Lebanon is not a permanent ceasefire. Israelis cannot go home, or their army cannot go to the south. They have to be prepared for war because it is an unstable situation, and Hezbollah is determined to expel them from the land. So all of this has been done. The sacrifices made by Hezbollah, and Hezbollah in particular, because they're right beside Palestine. At least Ansarullah and Yemen have the luxury of being further away. But Hezbollah has faced the brunt of these genocidal attacks. They've made huge sacrifices for the people of Gaza. And willingly, the sacrifice that Hezbollah has made for Palestine, I think, is extraordinary. They made these sacrifices without being pushed into doing so. Now, they're being attacked in Lebanon by their enemies and by the West and by collaborators and by those aligned to the West. They're being conspired against by Qatar and others who pretend to be supporters of Palestine. All the masks have been removed. One of the wonderful things, if I could say it that way, one of the wonderful things about these 15 months is that if anyone has open eyes, they see the truth now. They see the truth about countries in the Persian Gulf. They see it about Turkey, Jordan, Egypt, everyone who's been pretending to support Palestine. They see the truth about the relationship between ISIS and Al Qaeda in the West, those who are promoting these groups and saying they're just freedom fighters. See the footage. Everyone has been exposed. Everyone has been exposed. Some people want to keep their eyes closed. That's we can't do anything about that. You can't force people to open their eyes. But for everyone else, it's clear as day who's siding with who's sacrificing, and who's taking advantage of the sacrifice of others, who took advantage of the sacrifice of Hezbollah. So, but Hezbollah is steadfast, they're powerful, and Hezbollah is preparing itself. And for those who think that Hezbollah is not able to get what it needs, all they have to do is look at Gaza. How does Iran get what Gaza needs, what weapons, what machinery they need under these circumstances? It gets there. How do they get what needs to be taken to Yemen to Yemen? Right now, the situation, for to be very blunt, it's easier for Hezbollah to work through Syria, because when you had the government of President Assad, especially over the last few years, they distanced themselves from the resistance, and they tilted towards Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. And we saw that they were not allowing Hezbollah to use their territory to bring in assets. There are all sorts of difficulties. They expelled the bulk of the Iranian forces that were being used to fight ISIS and Al Qaeda, to their own detriment, of course. And Iran continued to prop up the government, and so did the Russians. Bring free oil. Iran gave 60,000 barrels a day at least of oil, and all sorts of other aid and assistance to Syria. But because Iran had to respect the sovereignty of the Syrian government, they couldn't just send anything they wanted into Lebanon. But now it's very easy. All they have to do is use the systems that the methods that are being used everywhere else. And these are, how do they get weapons and machinery and other things into Gaza? It's the same thing. People will do it for them.